Good morning from London and good evening from Tokyo. My name is Richard Linenthal, and on behalf of the Bibliographical Society, it is my great pleasure to introduce our visit to the Rare Books and Special Collections Department of Keio University Library in Tokyo. For those who are unable to join us due to work or travel schedules or awkward time zones, I am pleased to say that today's program is being recorded and will be available on the Society's website. When I myself first visited Keio well over 40 years ago, who could possibly have imagined that today we would be stepping inside the library from all around the world, thanks to the wonders of Zoom technology. But in a quickly changing and adapting world, it gives me great comfort that our hosts today have been my real life friends for all of these past decades. The Bibliographical Society is grateful to Professor Satoko Tokunaga, the Society's Honorary Secretary for Japan, Professor Takami Matsuda, Professor Takahiro Sasaki, and Professor Emeritus Toshiyuki Takamiya. Our speakers just scratch the surface in showing us some of the treasures at Keio. Professor Sasaki begins the video with a selection of important Japanese and Chinese manuscripts and early printed books. He includes one major recent discovery, the oldest known manuscript of the Analects of Confucius, a scroll copied in China in the 6th century and taken to Japan more than 1,000 years ago. Professors Matsuda and Tokunaga continue with Western antiquarian material, in which Keio is famously strong. There is an illuminated Book of Hours, which belonged to a lady in waiting to Queen Elizabeth I, a Hopton Hall manuscript of Middle English devotional texts, Beneventan script of the early 12th century, and illumination by the great humanist scribe Bartolomeo San Vito of the early 16th century. For early printed books, although we do not see in person the Keio Gutenberg Bible, that will have to wait for another visit, we are shown another great first, William Caxton's Recoil of the Histories of Troy, the first book printed in the English language. Following the video, Professor Toshi Takamiya will share some happy memories of early book acquisitions at Keio, and after that, our speakers have kindly agreed to take questions from the audience. A couple of housekeeping comments from me. The first, please feel free to post questions to the chat function at any time during the presentation. I would ask everyone to please mute themselves and turn off their video during the presentation to help with the bandwidth. And during the video, you may wish to make adjustments to the sound level if you find it helpful. Now, without any further delay, let me hand over to Team Keio.
Welcome to the Keio University Library Virtual Tour. I'm Satoko Tokunaga.
I'm Takami Matsuda, and it's a very beautiful sunny day in March, and the library is very quiet, being the end of the term.
And it will be very nice to spend some time in the library. So shall we start the tour?
Yes, so please join us.
Here we are in the rare book room of the Keio University Library. And Professor Sasaki will introduce Japanese collections, and Professor Matsuda and I will introduce some of highlights of the Western rare books and medieval manuscripts. Hello, my name is Takahiro Sasaki, and I'm a member of Keio Institute of Oriental Classics. My major interest is Japanese book history. And today, I'd like to introduce some Japanese and Chinese rare books from the Keio University Library. The first is a Chinese scroll. This is a commentary on the Analects of Confucius, produced in the first half of the 6th century. It was produced no later than 100 years after the original text was established. This is the oldest surviving book on the Analects in the world. This was written in China and brought to Japan at a very early time, and since then, it's passed from the owner to owner. The script has a very archaic feature. Then next, this front cover was added after the 17th century. Opening it, the original cover emerges, probably dating from the 14th century. This manuscript, copied in the 13th century, contains a volume of the Tale of Genji. This binding style, similar to Western codex, was most commonly used in Japan among East Asian countries. The Tale of Genji was written in the early 11th century, and in the early 13th century, a critical text was prepared by collating 21 old manuscripts. This manuscript at Keio was probably produced around that time. This is written in very beautiful script and on very fine paper of the period, a very important witness to the study of the Tale of Genji. This luxury box contains a set of 54 volumes of the Tale of Genji. And this gorgeous cover, using real gold leaf, beautifully glitters. Decorating books with gold and silver has a long, flourishing history in Japan. This book was made in the 17th century for a daughter of a high-status samurai as her wedding gift. This type of gift book was lavishly made, and this manuscript is a sumptuous example. The text was copied by one hand on very fine paper in the early 17th century. Let's move from Japanese manuscripts to printed books. While the Japanese history of printing started in the 8th century, book publication started around the 11th century. And this is a very early example of the codex form, printed in the mid-13th century. Before that, scroll books were dominant in Japanese book culture.
死体の印刷物として早い時期のものでして、これは13世紀中ぐらいのものになります。で、こちらはですね、荒野版と呼ばれるタイプのものでして、
This is the so-called Koya edition of book catalog, printed at Koya-san, where Shingonshu, the head temple of Buddhism sects, situated. The two-side printing was relatively popular in Japan, but was not the case in China and the Korean Peninsula. So this is a quite good example of two-side printing of the period. This book was made to resemble a manuscript, using a magnificent script and fine quality paper. This is an edition of the oldest book catalog, which was transmitted from China to Japan in the early 9th century. And this is the colophon. The sheets were glued together with no string used. The glued sheets are vulnerable to burrowing by bookworms. Another printed book is a very rare example of Japanese movable copper type printing published in 1616. The introduction to Japan of movable copper type printing dates back to 1593. When Japan invaded the Korean Peninsula and planted a copper movable type, which was developed in the Yi Dynasty. The publication of this book was ordered by Tokugawa Ieyasu, who established the Tokugawa shogunate of the Edo period. There are two early 17th century editions, which are the unique examples printed with movable copper type under his order. And the Keio University Library holds both editions. This book, Gunsho Chiyo, is a collection of political texts which originated in China, but now surviving only in Japan. As metal type printing is costly and technically demanding, this is an extremely rare example. The paper is folded in half with the printed side facing out. Only one side of paper was printed, which was a common method in East Asia. Japan has a long history of illustrated books, and they survive in large numbers. This is Tomonaga, an illustrated scroll made in the late 17th century. It was probably in the possession of a high-ranking samurai family. It uses very luxurious paper decorated with underpainting using gold leaf. The reverse side is painted with silver paint. The text is written in a beautiful script, probably by a professional hand. This is also luxuriously made, with extensive use of mineral paints, as well as gold and silver leaf. The production of this kind of gorgeous scroll ended by the end of the 17th century. Multicolor woodblock printing became more commonplace in the latter half of the 18th century, and then this type of illustrated scrolls became obsolete. I hope you enjoy a brief introduction to the Japanese printing history and also highlights of the Keio University Library collections. I will finish my talk with Keio University's collection of ukiyo-e. Ukiyo-e images are multicolored, and several of them are in book form. Famous example is a souvenir of cramming. The paintings were done by Utamaro Kitagawa, a renowned ukiyo-e artist, and this book was published around 1789. Multicolor printing technique, which started in mid-18th century, was relatively new at the time, but we can find quite advanced techniques in this book. This is a scene of cramming at the seashore, and a satirical short poem. Shells are painted in detail using relief techniques. This is a very splendid and world-famous work. Thank you for your attention. Keio University Library holds about 60 incunables, most of which have been catalogued, and descriptions are available on the digital collection, where the books are arranged in the order of acquisition. The first date of acquisition of incunables at Keio was in 1979, in which Toshiyuki Takamiya, now Professor Emeritus at Keio, was instrumental. After he returned from his sabbatical in Cambridge, he encouraged the library to purchase Western medieval manuscripts and incunables, as he was aware that they are a landmark of prestigious research libraries in the West. He also collaborated with the chief clerk of the library, Masatoshi Shibukawa, and Akira Oide, the librarian in the early 1980s, who shared the collection philosophy. Especially in the 1980s and 1990s, Keio actively acquired Western rare books, and the next generation has endeavored to inherit this collection policy. Perhaps the most famous incunable at Keio is the Gutenberg Bible, which Keio acquired in 1996. This copy, printed on paper and surviving only in the first volume, is a rare example of having been illuminated, bound, and owned in the 15th century Mainz. It was formerly in the Doheny collection and sold at Christie's sale in 1987.
No doubt, the Gutenberg Bible has an irresistible charm, but here I'd like to illuminate that Keio also has other attractive incunables, even in a humble number. So here I'd like to introduce two examples: the first acquisition at Keio and the first English incunable in the world.
And here we are with Keio's first acquisition of incunable, and the content is Justinus's epitome of Roman history, and published in Milan in 1475. And this is the opening page, so very fascinating in the illuminated page with the coat of arms and some nice margin area. And the provenance is very, very interesting. And here is a note written by a hand when the former head of the incunable collection at the British Library, John Goldfinch, came to Keio several years ago, and he identified
Richard Heber's collection.
Yes. So also there is a book label, and it says Markley Library. And actually it comes from the Markley Library, Markley Castle. And also below that label, Iseido. You know that. Yes. This is a very, very famous and traditional bookshop located in central Tokyo. I contacted the owner of Iseido, and he couldn't find a record of it, but as far as we can tell from the list of incunables in Japan, which was compiled and published in 1964, the Keio copy is listed in there. So we can tell that this book was purchased or donated no later than that. So this is the first incunable collection. Well, among the Keio University Library's incunable collection, I'd like to introduce a special one, the History of Troy, printed by William Caxton, which was used to be thought to be printed in Bruges, but as you know, Dr. Lotte Hellinger recently argued this might have been printed in Ghent. And it has also a wonderful provenance, and you can see the book label of Sion College Library. And also there is a marginaria here, and we know this was donated by the son of Captain Matthew Forster, who was a merchant of London in 17th century. And this book then was sold at Sion College Library auction and purchased by H.P. Krause, then purchased by Barnard College, then Keio University acquired this wonderful, very important and rare copy of Caxton.
So now I'd like to introduce you to some of the medieval manuscripts in Keio University Library. The acquisition of medieval manuscript started in 1976 when Toshiyuki Takamiya recommended a copy of the Regimine Principio, the 15th century manuscript produced in England, to the library. And then it was followed by two very important collections of manuscript leaves. One compiled by Bernard Rosenthal in 1980, and the other is 35 leaves, formerly in the collection of Tim Manby, which we acquired in 1982. These purchases were also recommended to the library by Toshiyuki Takamiya, and he has been instrumental in the purchase of the almost all medieval manuscript until the end of the 20th century, at least. In the library, I think that 17 codices and about 300 single leaves from the 9th century to the late 15th or early 16th century. So in the 21st century, I recommended some manuscript codices to the library, mostly the late medieval books of hours. So I'd like to start by introducing some of them to you. So it's the first book of hours the library purchased in 1986. And it is the very typical book of hours produced in Rouen, late 15th century, still quite available on the market. But I think the one interesting feature of this manuscript is that it has the 17th century cut of the print of the 12 months, the occupation of the months on the blank space. Iconographically, this is a very typical book of hours produced in Rouen in the late 15th century, and nothing significant about this. But I think this example shows the sort of longevity or the continuous use of the book of hours in the early modern Europe. And the other example I would like to share is the so-called Fitten hours produced in the southern Netherlands, probably in Bruges in the late 15th or early 16th century. It belongs to the Fitten family, and actually you can find the names written here. There's a list of alphabet, and then by me, Francis Fitten. And there's also another signature called Elizabeth Davenport. Francis Fitten was the gentleman of the Queen's Privy Chamber. Of course, the Queen is Elizabeth I. And the Elizabeth Davenport was also the Queen's lady in waiting in 1554. So probably these were the owners, and I found out that the Fitten and the Davenport, well, the Elizabeth was her maiden name was Venables, and they were closely related, and so the manuscript passed from one hand to the other in the early 16th century.
So even Queen Elizabeth I might have
Yes,
touched.
she might have touched it. Yes,
So.
Yes, I usually tell my students in the classroom that you may be able to find the fingerprint of the Queen Elizabeth if you look very closely. The other thing that I find rather funny is that crude but cute the drawings of the rabbits.
Oh yes.
The book of hours that's often used by children to learn to letters, and these drawings may be done by children who were using this book to learn alphabet, maybe. The other book of ours I'd like to show is most of the miniatures have been taken out, and there's only 4 or 5 pages remaining. But from the remaining pages, we can see that the quality is very good. And yes, this is the French book of ours in the use of Langres. Langres is the city in the eastern part of France. I think this is the owner's name. Antoine Bruguière is the probably name of the owner, and also his motto, "Si mieux non pis," which sounds like a tautology, but anyway, this is his motto, and you can see that the iconography is this is the 4 saints: Saint George, Saint Denis, and Saint Christopher, and the St. John the Evangelist. I haven't been able to find much about this Antoine Brigade, but this motto points to a family in the Franche-Comté, which was in the diocese of the Langres in the late 15th century. Maybe so that was the connection behind this book. Another interesting example, I think, is this. The text is the Geoffrey of Binsoff, the Poetria Nova, the very popular handbook of rhetoric in the Middle Ages. Very important feature of this manuscript is that the about, I think, the 20 of the pages are the palimpsest. Yes, the text of the palimpsest itself was nothing special, just the 15th century commercial record of the commercial transaction. And I think one of the most, well, the most important, the vernacular manuscript we have is probably the Hopton Hall manuscript, the collection, the Middle English miscellany of the religious prose, entirely in English. But yes, some of the prose are unpublished and unrecorded. And Satoko and I have been trying to produce the edition of this particular manuscript. We have been talking about it in the past 10 years or so. We will in the near future. Yes, I made my resolution public, so I cannot back out now. So. And finally, the humanist manuscript. And this is the Cicero or Cicero's De Finibus Bonarum et Malorum, produced in Florence in the 1450. And it has a very impressive provenance, which probably Richard Linenthal can explain much better than me, because he was instrumental in introducing this manuscript to us.
And many others.
Yes, many others as well. And, well, yes, in the former collection of the B.S. Krohn. And, it was in the San Marco Library in Florence, and formerly in the possession of the Giorgio Antonio Vespucci, who was the uncle of the Amerigo Vespucci, and also very important humanist of the day. So it gives the sort of the first-hand experience of the Italian Renaissance to our students. Among the single leaves, there are some very important examples as well. For example, the Beneventan, the script, and also one by the Bartolomeo San Vito. If we start talking about these, maybe we need another 30 minutes or so.
Okay,
yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you for joining our virtual tour. We hope you enjoy our collections, and we will be looking forward to meeting you, seeing you at Keio University Library. All are welcome.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation, and we will have an opportunity to thank our library hosts in a few minutes when they have kindly agreed to take questions from all of us in the audience. But first, let me introduce Professor Takamiya, who hardly needs any introduction. Toshi, a great scholar and collector in his own right, was one of the principal advisors to the Keio Library during its early and most formative years, acquiring early Western manuscripts and printed books. He will now speak to us live from his home in Tokyo. Toshi, over to you.
Thank you, Richard.
We need, could you start your video, please? Perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. And you have an assistant.
Exactly, yes. Right. My 3-year-long research in Cambridge, 1975 to 78, led me to the remarkable opportunities to study Middle English manuscripts and Western rare books in the university and college libraries, and to meet distinguished experts in these disciplines in both academia and antiquarian bookselling world in London, Oxford, and Cambridge. Not to mention Dr. Ian Doyle of Durham, who was my supervisor 1976 to 77. His recent death is terribly missed by his friends and followers. During this period, I acquired quite a few rare books for my own collection. I have also recommended many more to Keio University. I'm still now singularly grateful to Mr. Masatoshi Shibukawa, a kind of one-man manager of the acquisition department of the library. I was on good terms with Mr. Shibukawa, who appreciated my combined talent of commercial and academic values in Western rare books. Also, thanks to the annual increase of the library budget by 5%, Mr. Shibukawa and I were able to help each other in finding special English, splendid English incunabula for the library, namely St. Alban's Chronicles, Caxton's Recueil of the History of Troy, first edition, and so on. In 1979, our attention was brought to the magnificent sale at Christie's, books and manuscripts from the library of Arthur A. Horton Jr., which included distinguished English books. Arthur Horton, as you know, was a great American collector of the 20th century, a successful industrialist. As the president of Corning Glass Works, he presented the Arthur Horton Library to Harvard University, his alma mater. Lot 108 of the Christie sale, which took place on the 13th June 1979, was William Caxton's Chronicles of England, or the Brut Chronicle, first edition, 1480. Since Keio owned no Caxton except for single leaves, we wanted, be it on this textually perfect copy as far as the catalog description is concerned. Cataloged DAF 997, SDC 9991, only 14 copies of this edition were recorded, many of them admittedly imperfect. Furthermore, the Horton copy carried brilliant provenance, the Duke of Devonshire, Henry E. Huntington, Roderick Terry. As soon as we acquired the Horton Library, I humbly asked Dr. Lotte Hellinger of the British Library to collate it against the BL copies. Surprisingly enough, she discovered that a certain leaf of the Horton copy was not with the first edition, but the second edition of 1482. She had detected it by the different lengths of slanting strokes, which Caxton used for punctuation. I was simply impressed by her bibliographical scrutiny. So What shall we do with this problem? Thanks to the advice of Mr. Nicholas Paul Wilson or Bernard Corridge, we reported the anomaly to the auction company, who eventually agreed to a 10% discount on the hammer price. Even in that period, the sum was sufficiently enough to purchase a decent flat in Tokyo. Bravo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toshi. Am I audible now?
Yes, of course.
Perfect, thank you. Once again, I would like to thank Satoko Tokunaga, Takami Matsuda, Takahiro Sasaki, and Toshi Takamiya for their kindness and great generosity in hosting the Bibliographical Society today. Before opening up the floor to questions, I would like to make one comment myself. Thanks to our Keio hosts, I am reminded once again how interconnected and truly international the world of early books and manuscripts is, and how the continuing advances in technology are making it even more so. Professor Matsuda showed us an Italian humanist manuscript of Cicero and commented that I would remember it, and indeed I do. It was acquired by Keio about 20 years ago and came from the distinguished collection of the late Brian Cron. Previously, it had belonged to the great French collector Ambroise Famadido, and after him, to two important English collectors, Harvey Frost and C.S. Ascherson. If you wish to learn more about Ascherson, and I strongly recommend it, all you need to do is to attend, either live or online, the talk being given this very evening in London by Bill Stoneman, former director of the Houghton Library at Harvard. It is sponsored by the London Medieval Manuscripts Seminar. Thank you again, and now for any questions. Feel free, I'm just going to check the chat function. There are already a couple of questions in, and let me start with those. The first two that I've noticed are directed to Professor Sasaki about that fascinating early printed book catalog that we were shown. One of the questions asks whether the red editions were added by hand or printed. Which seems, I myself am also interested to hear about that. And then the question is about the, well, another question, is it printed by wood blocks? And I suppose the question is, are they large blocks or individual types? And perhaps we'll learn a bit more about that. And then does the text represent a specific group of, or rather books from a specific library? So if perhaps Professor Sasaki and Satoko Tokunaga could reply to that, we would all be very grateful.
Professor Sasaki, shall I, or maybe the first question from you? Yes, we were talking. Actually, we were exchanging. Sorry, we were kind of chatting about these questions, and I'm going to answer these questions on behalf of Professor Sasaki. To the first question, yeah, it was done by hand, so it was red ink was written or added by hand. It's like an annotation by hand. And to the second question, the catalog was made using wood block. So it was done by wood block printing. And it is a catalog of Buddhist writings brought by a famous distinguished monk called Kukai, who lived about 8th or 9th century. So it's not a catalog of a specific library, but it's a list of books. So, and to the third question, I personally think this is really interesting. And according to Professor Sasaki, it is more common not to insert illustration on a long, how can I say, on a text, on the books of which main focus is text, such as like the Tale of Genji or Japanese poetry. So instead, illustrations were often added when the book's purpose it was to explain something. So the illustration was more kind of complementary things. And also he said, instead, in illustration one often not added, but instead, sorry, when the illustration were not added, but instead, colored paper or paper with patterns were often used. So in the Japanese book culture, paper is also very important. So paper, as we have seen it, paper also played an important role. And as we often, as we also saw in the video, illustration were often added to the scroll. But the tradition of adding or inserting illustration into the codex book form came a bit later than that. So.
Yes, thank you. And I noticed that there is another question on this very subject saying, I noticed that there is no illumination in the manuscripts, except for a few exceptions. Am I to understand that illumination was not in the tradition? Well, I would take it that for some texts, it probably was, yes, very much in the tradition. It probably, rather like in the Western examples, it depended on the texts. And what the Japanese production can add is sort of an underlying decoration in the paper itself, which is, to my eye, an extremely beautiful addition. Now, there is another question concerning the antiquarian market for Japanese manuscripts and codices. Is that something you're able to comment on? Is it an active market? Certainly from my perspective in the West, it's not a market that I myself am at all familiar with, although I know that domestically in Japan, I believe it's a very extremely professional and active one.
Well, it's quite hard question for me. Sorry, allow me to speak up quickly in Japanese. 佐々木先生、日本のマーケットって今でも活発ですかね？
古書のですか？
はい、日本の古書のマーケット。
大変活発です。
Very, very active.
Yes.
日本でですか？日本において。
日本国、もちろん日本の本が世界でも売られてますけども、日本国内では古い本の流通は非常に活発です。
In Japan, still the market for antiquarian Japanese books has been very, very active, and also not only in Japan but also internationally. So.
Yes. And my own impression is that it is a market with enormous knowledge and sophistication. Right. Thank you very much for that. Now, are there any other questions? Yes, there are. Ed Potton is asking, can I ask about the future development of the Keio collection? What are the priorities for continuing to build on the super books we've seen today?
That's a very good question. And wow, I'd like to hear some advice from Professors Matsuda and also Takami.
Yes, that's a very good question and also very difficult to answer. But it really concerns first I need to say that it really concerns the budget of the library. And if I may start from the economic and financial side of this question, most of the books we acquired, I was able to show, was purchased by a research grant, a very large research grant we received in the past 10 years or so. And that was the reason why I was able to concentrate on some of the more interesting books of ours, of the late Middle Ages. And that reflected very much my own interest in the book history. And because I was able to use the grant money for that, the library was willing to accept my recommendation. But when we use the budget from the library, there's always several professors trying to recommend the books of their own interest, and there has to be a sort of selection. And it's very well. You can see that if you for 1 year, if you choose a book for humanities, in the next year you may have to buy a book in the history of economics, and so it will be very difficult to follow a specific policy in the collection building. So I think it really depends on if we are able to get substantial grant, research grant for the particular subject. So so I think it will be up to younger generations like Satoko who will be able to apply for future grant, I think.
And I would say it's rather like in any great library, the collections develop over time and will reflect the enthusiasms of successive generations of the people building the collections.
Yes.
But, thank you. No, that is fascinating and makes absolute sense. There are quite a few questions now. There is one from Janet Tyson asking about herbals and books on natural history and whether there are examples at Keio.
Can I show an image? Because yes, the answer is yes. Well,
oh, wow.
Because of the time, we have to cut quite a lot of amount of information, not only about Western medieval manuscripts and Inkunaba, but also we do have a wonderful collection of natural history and also encyclopedia, and especially the natural history collection. Natural history collection was collected by a famous writer, Aramata Hiroshi. And it's a superb collection. So yes, we do have a collection.
Fantastic. That is an illustrated answer, which thank you very much. And then a question, a very interesting question from Orietta Del Rold about the paper and the quality of the paper. I imagine she is talking about the Japanese and possibly the Chinese material. When you commissioned a book, did you discuss the paper? Did you pay more for better paper? How did that work?
佐々木先生、注文するときに紙の質っていうのもやはり注文のときに本を作るときにっていうのは特に写本においては決めることありますか？
やはりそのバインディングのスタイルによって使う紙も違ったりしますし、あとランク等々で非常に多種類の中からチョイスして作るし、また多くの種類が生産されて販売もされていました。
Yes, the answer is very, very big yes, Marietta. The paper is very, very important among in the Japanese book culture, and the paper decides. Paper also shows the ranks of the book or status of the book, and also it is very closely related to the binding style. So, if when you order a book, what kind of binding style you like to choose, and then you or the binder will choose the appropriate paper. So it's great picture. Takami and I were just so excited to see the quality of paper because some of the very thin and some of the very thick and strong.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
you
Yes.
should come to Japan.
Yes. Yes, you should visit us. Yes.
Yes, and of course, in Japanese culture, paper making has been developed into such an art form. It's beautiful to see it used so imaginatively and beautifully in the production of scrolls or codices. Now, there is a question which I think is for Professor Matsuda, which is, what was the rationale for the acquisition of so much French material? Was it a particular research interest? And I think, Takami, you can answer that quite easily.
Well, yes, it reflects my own research interest in the books of ours, both manuscript and printed. So my interest was in the books of ours produced in Rouen and also printed in the northern France in the late 15th and early 16th century. But the other reason is that the French books of ours is quite, less difficult to find on the market. And I think it's a sort of balance between my research interest and availability on the market and the budget. Yes.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Thank you very much. I'm aware we are about to approach the 1 hour. I see that the last comment that has come in capital letters is intelligently and beautifully presented and photographed. Thank you very much, which I think we will all share. That was a really wonderful program. I have enjoyed it at all stages, in discussing it with you from the beginning, in working with you during the enormous efforts you put into making your presentation. And I would like to give enormous thanks to all of you at Keio on behalf of the Bibliographical Society. I'm pleased to say and remind you once again that this whole program has been recorded and will be available on the Society's website for those who've been unable to join us today. If there are no more comments, I'll just
Can I make a quick announcement, Richard?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Oops, Satoko, you
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. If you would like to learn more about Japanese paper washi, Professor Sasaki has produced a wonderful course, online course by Future Learn. So if you register it, you can learn more about it. Actually, he has led 3 more. And Professor Matsuda is producing another interesting online course, actually in collaboration with the British Library. And so we are working with Karen and also Christian Jensen. So please join us online again. And we'd like to also thank you, Richard, Nenta, and also Karen Limper-Hertz. They have been helping us enormously. Actually, they are the director of the show, so thank you.
Not at all. And if you look at the chat line, the compliments to all of you at Team Keio are rolling in. That has been enormously enjoyable, enormously successful. But let me just really thank you again on behalf of the Bibliographical Society and wish you a good night in Tokyo, and here in London, a happy lunchtime. So many, many thanks, and we look forward. I think you will be the victims of your own success, and I'm sure we will be asking you again to do something more. But in the meantime, thank you and good night in Tokyo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for